The Chaim made a point in terms of the spelling during Chukosai. The vav is deleted to indicate it's singular and plural. So the first interpretation at Chukosai, what does it mean? That it's alluding to Torah Shebaal Peh. However, although one is the written, one is the oral, but factually it's really one, because the interpretation, the understanding of the written is the oral. That's Hashem's interpretation. I once said, these people, the Rambam rules, it's based on the Gemara, that we say that Yud Gimel Middos Torah Nishreshes Bohem, the 13 methodology in which we interpret the Torah. So Ramchal explains at one location, what's Torah Shebaal Peh? At Sinai, Hashem had given over all the laws, what they are. And for instance, it says, so literally means before a blind man, you should not put a stumbling block. So if I would not have Torah Shebaal Peh, how would I interpret that? If you have a blind man walking down the street, do not put a stumbling block. Torah Shebaal Peh, Hashem says, when I said that, what I meant to say was, don't mislead a person. Person comes for your advice, don't give him advice where you know the advice is not in his best interest, and you're misleading him. Or don't put him in a situation of temptation, like a Nazir is not permitted to drink wine. Don't offer him wine because he may cross the line. That's Lifnei V'Lositim Michshol. That's Torah Shebaal Peh. So Ramchal writes that at Sinai, all the Torah Shebaal Peh was given. So what is the objective of learning Torah? To link the Torah Shebaal Peh to the Torah Shebaal. How do we extrapolate and how do we confirm and show that the oral law is directly being stated and lies is embedded in the written law? And how is that done? We have Yud Gimel Middos Torah Shebaal. Hashem gave us 13 methodologies through which we interpret the Torah, whether it's Gzera Shava, Kal V'chomer, whatever, as it's stated in the Siddur, Yud Gimel Middos Torah Shebaal. 13 methodologies. So at one time, even today, there's a question, could a woman be included within a minyan? Or to create the quorum, it's only males. Women are not qualified. So the question is why? Why are they not qualified? So the Gemara says, it's based on the Gzera Shava. You have two words. There were certain words given at Sinai, and it's, as Rashi says, many locations. Gzera Shava is what is Rebbe L'Talmud. It's what the Rebbe, what the teacher passed on to the student. That's part of the Torah from Sinai. That's the basis for Gzera Shava. Kal V'chomer is logic. And if the logic is cogent, there's no fallacy in the logic, that's a basis to interpret the Torah. And that's reliable. But Gzera Shava is the words were given, and by pairing up the words, these words, that indicates what's written here applies somewhere else. That's Gzera Shava. So how do we know that a woman is not included with a minyan? It's based on a Gzera Shava. First, how do you know a minyan is 10? Because this is Eidah. And how do we know Eidah is 10? Because Eidah, we find by Meraglim, that Hashem said refers to the Meraglim because only 10 of the 12 Meraglim had brought back negative reports, and they're referred to as Eidah Hara Azos, this evil Eidah. And elsewhere it says when regarding Kiddush Hashem, it says Eidah. So we see Eidah as 10. So from there, the Gemara says that a quorum is 10, and only males qualify to be the Eidah. So what's the basis for the law that only a minyan is only created if you have 10 men? It's what? It's halacha l'mishum Sinai. It was given at Sinai, that's Torah Shebaal Peh, based on the Gzera Shava, that Eidah means 10 people, 10 men, not women. So if somebody says, this interpretation, it's because the rabbis are male chauvinists, and that's why they interpret the Torah this way. If a person makes that kind of statement, it's a heretical statement. Because the halacha is that if a person even denies an interpretation based on any one of the Yud Gimel Middos, which is all rooted in Sinai, you're denying the authenticity of the Torah because that's the Masorah. That's the Masorah. That was transmitted at Sinai. That's the tradition. So if a person makes that kind of comment and questions it, you're questioning the validity and the authenticity of the Torah. So at Sinai, it was Chukosai. Torah Shebaal Peh. Now we have to pair it up. Therefore, according to what Oral Torah is learning over here, the Torah deletes the Vav. In essence, it's one. Torah Shebaal is one, because this is God's interpretation of what he meant. This is what I said, this is what I meant. However, it's two. We have the written and we have the oral. That's the first interpretation of Kosai in the plural, but yet it's written with the Vav deleted. The other interpretation, he says, the Rambam rules, he doesn't bring the Rambam, but the Rambam rules in Hilchos Talmud Torah that if a person has time to learn, and it's a question of learning during the daytime or the nighttime, his main Talmud Torah should be at nighttime. He bases it on a pasuk in Eicho, because Yirmiyah, a Navi who wrote Eicho, when he saw the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, he uses the term Kumi Roni Balaylo. Kumi, come and sing out at nighttime. And the Rambam says, Ein Rina El Torah. What's the Rina? What is the song of the Jew? Rina? Ein Rina El Torah. So therefore, if a person wants to designate his primary time to study Torah, what is the better time to learn, day or night? It's nighttime. However, but nevertheless, you have an obligation to learn during the day and during the nighttime. Why? Because the pasuk in Yeshua says, "V'agismo yomam v'loilo." You must engage in Torah day and night. So even if a person has a right not to learn, because he has to be occupied with business, with other issues, other matters, which is exempt from studying Torah. Nevertheless, he should study minimally something during the daytime, something during the nighttime, based on the pasuk Yisrael Yom V'Loilo. Imchu Kosai Teilechu. We're speaking about the two levels of Torah. It's the same Torah. Let's say Torah Shebaal Peh. However, you should designate sometime during the daytime, sometime during the nighttime to study Torah. That every part of the 24 hours should somehow be linked, or each segment should be linked to the Torah. That's the second interpretation. Now, the third, he says something interesting. First, you have to study for yourself to become knowledgeable. The two obligations. The Rambam rules in Hilchos Talmud Torah that one has an obligation to study himself. One has an obligation to teach his child. A grandfather has an obligation to teach his grandson. And a chocham, a person who's knowledgeable in Torah, has an obligation to teach ben chavero. That's the Rambam. Chavod melamed is beno. You have an obligation to teach your son. You have an obligation to teach your grandson, and you have an obligation to teach others. So the Rambam asks, how are you able to reconcile everything? If you're occupied with your grandson, how do you teach your son? How do you teach your grandson? If you're busy, if you're occupied with your son and grandson, how do you learn with others? So Rambam speaking, person has time. He has time that he is able to learn with others, or he's not learning with a son. He has no son. He has no grandson. He has an obligation to learn with others. So the chiyuv, the obligation of Torah, is firstly yourself, and then to teach others. Chayvod lamed is ben chavero. A person has to teach his fellow's child Torah. That's the obligation. The two levels of limud. First, you have to be knowledgeable yourself. You have to study for yourself. In addition, to teach others. The chsiv v'limartem osam es b'neichem v'shinantom. L'zemach b'chuksai l'oshem rabim lilmod ulelamed lishma v'lasos. It says a person has lilmod to study, ulelamed teach others, lishma v'lasos, b'omro imitzosah tishmoru v'asisim osam. What's teilechu? It's Gemara. Even when you're traveling, al derech omro b'lech to derech ba'avoso tisket tomid. The person, even when it's more difficult to studies, that's an indication of to what degree he values the Torah itself. I'm going to stop this for a moment. That's what we have when we have machlokus. Was the B'sarat Sinai this or that? So what's the argument we find in the Gemara? Each one cites pesukim, and each one is actually based on the pesukim. He's proving that his Masorah is more correct. And even regarding the Masorah, there's even a question when they argue what the Masorah is, what are the 13 methodologies? And because the basis for if the result is one or the other, it's based on what methodology you use, how to interpret the Torah. So it all goes back to what the Masorah was. To prove, even regarding the methodology, to prove the authenticity of your position, that your position is the more correct position. That's the whole discussion the Gemara view of it. We're arguing Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. When it says Methodologies Shalim, we're speaking about you evaluate the assets of the damager or the damagee, and how to interpret it. That's all based on the Masorah. It didn't start with Rabbi Akiva. It started before. How they're not the first generation of the first machlokas over here.
So was the first set of Rabbeinu Tam tefillin considered heretical?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Rabbeinu Tam himself is not heretical. He has a basis to disagree with Rashi. Heretical means if you reject and say, even though the Gzera Shava says that, I disagree. You have to have a valid position why you argue. If you have no position to argue, you just can't argue. Well, I don't think it's right. I think it's based upon your bias because you're a male, and you're biased against women. You know something? That's nonsense. Because the basis for the halacha is not based on what I feel, but rather it's rooted in a methodology which is part of our Masorah. A person who's a Talmud Chacham, he has a right to interpret the Torah in many ways. Talmud Vosel Yichadish B'Droshos Haksuvim Kashe Yuchal HaKosav says Chol HaShetas Yodem B'Toroso. A person is able to interpret pesukim as long as it fits into the words. You're permitted to extrapolate various concepts from the pesukim. What does that mean? She Torah telchu pardesa. You're permitted to walk through the orchard of the Torah and pick fruit. Like you pick fruit when you go into an orchard. Tanayu hadover imatzosai tishmoru. What does that mean? Pirush shlotia megala ponu b'Torah shlo kalocha. As long as your interpretation of Torah is not contradicting to anything which is etched in stone, you have a right to extrapolate a concept, a new insight. Sholitaris atomeg. One can't say, I have reason to purify something which is contaminated. Asisem osam shlo tami sator my morim zal hamagala ponu b'Torah shlo kalocha elochet mabo. It's interesting. Let's say a person studying and he wants to introduce a new concept, which is not contrary to halacha. The halacha is intact, but it's a new approach. But the approach is extrapolated from the understanding of the Torah, and this has a profound effect in what direction, how Jews invest their time in the study of Torah, but it's not contradictory to anything which is halacha, 100% permitted. Person would say, but where are you coming from? Where are you coming from? Famous, Ben Gurion, he once had a meeting with the Chazon Ish. Ben Gurion wanted to conscript everybody into the army, conscription. And the Chazon Ish, and he knew the Chazon Ish, whatever position the Chazon Ish took on, all the observant community in Israel is siding with the Chazon Ish. So he's going to convince the Chazon Ish why yeshiva students should be conscripted. Okay? So one day, this is after the founding of the state, this black car pulls up in the Barak, which was sand dunes. And first he sends his head of staff to set up the meeting. And he comes to the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish was a man who dedicated his life, every moment was invested in Torah. And he was a man, didn't even weigh 100 pounds. And he comes into his house, knocks on the door, comes to his house. He says, the prime minister would like to have a meeting to come to discuss something with you. Do you have, what time should he come? He says, my door is open 24 hours a day. Whether he's the prime minister or an ordinary Jew, any Jew is welcome to come to my home, 24 hours a day. His chief of staff was a person who was a secular Jew. This didn't sit well with him. He became incensed. You equate the prime minister to any other Jew. My door's open 24 hours. The prime minister can come like anybody else can come. You're not impressed? Okay, so he goes back. He's livid. And he says to the Ben Gurion, he says, the audacity of this rabbi, he equates you to any Jew walking through his door 24 hours a day. He says, that's exactly why I want to go see him. He's impressed with no one, even with the prime minister of Israel. That was Ben Gurion's response to his head of staff. He comes to the Chazon Ish, and Chazon Ish, Ben Gurion knew Tanakh by heart. And he believed, because he knew Tanakh by heart, he was a great Talmud Chacham. Because maybe he knew Tanakh better than a person who was a Talmud Chacham. Because he could quote verses and so on and so forth. But he didn't know Talmud, he didn't have basic beliefs, and he didn't know Mishnah, he didn't know Gemara, didn't know Rambam, didn't know any of it. So he comes to the Chazon Ish and they get involved back and forth. They spend a few hours together. And after everything's said and done, he says to the Chazon Ish, but why are you so adamant about your position? Why? Why do you think you're so right? So Chazon Ish opens up his shirt and he says to Ben Gurion, Libi Omer Kach, because my heart tells me that's correct. He says, but where does it, could you bring proof to it? He says, I don't have to bring proof. Libi Omer. My heart, I contain what Torah represents, and my feelings, my heart says this is the right thing, and therefore I will not change as much as an iota. I'm fixed in my position, and Ben Gurion accepted it. This is the story of the meeting between the Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish. Libi Omer. What the Orach Chaim HaKadosh is saying, as long as the concept or the perspective is not contrary to halacha, you could extrapolate it from the pasuk. There's a reason why there's no reason not to. No, very often you have Hasidim, the Rebbes, they go and they interpret the Torah and they bring out certain points. It's what we call drush. That's not what the pasuk is saying, but because the Torah uses a certain word with the pasuk, they say from here we're able to understand something else. The pasuk is not, there's no problem with that. Even though the simple understanding is not that, but as long as what they're extrapolating is something which is not contrary to anything which is what we call the Mesorah, it's fine. That's b'chuksai telechu. As long as it's not contradictory, it's mitzvos tishmoru, it's not contrary to the mitzvos and doesn't infringe on that, it's fine, you could say it. You can expound it. However, very often a person expounds a certain precept or a certain concept, even though it's not contrary, but that concept could lead to something which is not good. And that's Ezel Chacham Rosa Nolad. Okay, Chovos HaLevavos, Shar Bitochon, Per Gimel, third chapter. Hakdoma Shlishis, Shiyachin Elokot Bitchono, Bo B'mashu Chayiv Leftoch Bo. A person should trust Hashem in areas that he's obligated to trust him. And don't have any other reliance other than him. You know, I have faith in God. But you know something? But if I'm in a fix, I have a good friend who'll never let me down. And you rely on that person, that is the basis for what? For your confidence. So you're not really fully relying on Hashem. So you have two sources to feel confident. You have Hashem and you have your buddy. You don't have faith in God. Your faith is not totally in Hashem, because if not for that friend, Hashem would not be sufficient to have trust in him. You will forfeit your trust in God when you associate him with someone else. This person was a king, and God, regardless of his devoutness, but he relied on the doctors. You know, I have the best doctor in the world. Of course, when he was deathly ill, he sought out the advice of the doctors, not Hashem. We say it every day at the end of Volotzion. Blessed is the person whose faith is in God, and the source of his faith is only God. Many years ago, interesting story. There was a certain person in Israel where he was in the position, only he was told by this benefactor, by this philanthropist, this Baal Tzedakah, to give money to support, to give to Rav Steinman money, a certain amount of money for Lev Lachim. Lev Lachim, Rav Steinman founded this movement for Kiruv, to provide Torah education for children, for families that didn't have that background, that orientation, and to do whatever you can to bring these families back into the fold as they should be. And it was, this person was supposed to give it, he was given the order, give the money to Rav Steinman. For whatever reason, this person didn't like Rabbi Steinman, didn't like him, and he took the money, didn't give it to him. He gave the money elsewhere. A few years later, he comes down with cancer. And I had a very contentious relationship with this person. I did not see eye to eye with him, and he knew that. And we had a very strained relationship because of a lot of this kind of stuff. And he never called him cancer. And somebody who was very close with me, he used to come to Yad Avram. His name was Rav Shulevitz, if you remember, Rabbi Shulevitz. And he says to him, maybe the reason why you have the cancer that you have is because Rav Steinman has a kapeda. Kapeda means you did something which you ruffled his feathers. And when you step on Rabbi Steinman, this is God's response. And that's why he came out with this illness. And he was being treated at time in Sloan Kettering by the best cancer doctors in the area which he had cancer. She says, I have nothing to worry about. I got the best doctors in the world. Rabbi Steinman, he has a kapeda, doesn't have I have the best doctors. I'm not worried. So this person says to him, you can have the best doctors in the world. If Rav Steinman has a kapeda, it's not going to help you. You're not going to survive. So he says to Rabbi Shulevitz, he says, I'm afraid to go to Rav Steinman. I'm afraid. Would you come with me? Would you come with me? So he says, because this person had a special relation with Rav Steinman. So he went with him. And he explains to him that Rav Steinman was unaware that he was supposed to get the money. And he tells him the story. So Rav Steinman says, I have no kapeda. I have no kapeda. He held back about $1.5 million. He says, but as a kapeda, all the children who are not brought back to Torah Judaism because you withheld the money, they have the kapeda. They're the ones. It's not me. It's between you and God. It has nothing to do with me. That's the problem. And unless you repay the money immediately, it was $1.5 million, it's a problem. That's what he told him. He says, I'll pay it out for 5 years. He says, no, it's not going to help. You have to pay the full amount immediately. But where am I getting? He says, that's not my problem. You did what you shouldn't have done. You got to correct it. And somehow he found sources to borrow the money and he paid. I'm just telling you the story. I got the doctors, the best doctors in the world. If Hashem says there's a kapeda because you denied these children to be brought back to Torah Judaism, it's not going to help you at all. The source of your belief is what has to be God himself. Nobody else. Of course, we have to establish, we have to take initiative, get a doctor. There are other means. You have to eat, you have to take care of yourself. That's not a problem. But of course, ultimately, everything is Hashem. That's what it's all about.